Welcome to Challenging Conversations, where we explore the fascinating and complex questions that influence our perception of life, faith, and the world around us. I'm your host, Jason Jimenez, and today we will explore the mysterious world of crime scenes, fugitives, and criminals, guided by the wisdom of an experienced detective. For decades, cold case homicide detective J. Warner Wallace meticulously investigated the dark corners of humanity, seeking the truth behind deaths and murders. In his relentless pursuit of leads, he not only uncovered the facts of each case, but also gained deep insights into human nature, justice, and the fundamental aspects of human identity and existence. But what can we possibly learn from a crime scene, a fugitive, or a crook? Can the evidence left behind in the aftermath of a crime reveal deeper truths about our own lives? Can the relentless pursuit of a fugitive teach us about determination and the quest for redemption? Join me as we explore these compelling questions, drawing from my friend J. Warner Wallace's unique perspective and vast experience. Jim, it's great to have you back on the show.
Well, thanks so much for having me. I appreciate you so much. And we're getting ready to do a big conference series together
Yeah,
with
that's
the
right. No,
reality.
we've
So
been spending a lot of time
yes.
together, going over a lot of
Well,
good things.
yesterday, I think we spent what, 2.5 hours,
Yeah,
two
I
and a
know.
half hours with
I
all
know.
the team
I
from
was actually
reality
sitting there
talking about it.
working. Yeah, you were working probably on
Yeah.
your next book. I was working on a
Oh,
sermon that I got to
no,
give on
I wasn't
Sunday.
working on the next book, but I was trying. I'll be honest. If you're done Zoom meetings, you know that there are times when you have to multitask. So I
That's
was
right.
trying to do that. Yes, for
Yeah.
sure. For
Yeah,
sure.
yeah. So it wasn't like we weren't paying attention. We could sometimes multitask. So
Yes, I was using this ear to pay attention and this
yeah,
eye to do other work. So I
yeah,
was kind
that's
of
right.
looking, yeah, that's not good.
No, it's going to be exciting. I mean,
Anyway.
we're always blessed to be back with reality. They do great
Oh, of
conferences, and
course.
obviously, I know
Yeah.
you go way back with Greg Kokel, who's been on the show. He's a great mentor, great friend.
Yeah.
The three of us just are just so blessed to do ministry
No, we
together. And
are. Yeah, we
I'm
are.
so excited because when I got your latest book, what number is this, by the way? The new one, The Truth in Truth Crime: What Investigating Death Teaches Us About the Meaning of Life. This is number what, 6 or 7? Well, I
So
mean, if you don't do all the children's stuff, right?
yeah, that so the ch I just it's the 6th adult book, but we do
Right.
kids books, and those kids books,
They do.
I have 2 more we're doing in the fall. We have 2 more we have to do, and not have to do, get to do.
Right.
Don't
Yeah.
my language is giving me away. No, actually, it has been really important work, and we take it seriously, and, we started off, for example, sometimes when you do an adult book, you'll get, the publisher will send you a kind of a ghostwriter who ends up kind of writing the kids version. You don't even have to it'll just say it's written by
Hmm.
him or her. We kind of knew that this unique angle in we were going to have to write them ourselves, Susie and I. So
Hmm.
so we did that, and they take, I think, more time because
Yeah.
if you think about it, the ratio of for junior hires, so 8 to 12, and if you think about the ratio of illustrations to text, it's much more equal, right? So I want a graphic element on every single page, either a large illustration or some kind of graphic element for students to kind of grab. And so it ends up meaning that you might spend, let's say you spend 3 months writing a book or 4 months writing a kid's book. You'll spend 3 or 4 months illustrating it. And so that's why it's like, ugh. And then when you do all of the um, extra it's like, for example, we always want like worksheets. And as a matter of fact, when we did the kids' books, we went to the market and we went to the cereal aisle and we
Oh,
turned over every cereal box. Because
nice.
you know how when you were growing up as a
Yeah.
kid, there was like
Yeah.
activities on the back of the
Exactly.
cereal box. So we just took photographs of all the backs of the cereal boxes to get ideas about what kinds of activities we could do
Mm.
chapter by chapter in our kids' books. And we tried to kind of reproduce that. Sometimes it's a crossword, sometimes it's whatever it may be. I just wanted to kind of see what the world was showing us on the back of cereal boxes. So by the time you do all of that material, you're into this thing now a year for a
Wow.
kid's book.
Yeah.
And that's why I try not to do too many because I know how long they take. But we have 2 that we're doing through Zondervan. So this is the 9th book overall, Truth and True Crime. But the next 2 will be kids books, and one of them will
Wow.
be a kids version of Person of Interest. So we have to think about how we're going to. That's one of the tricks too, is when you're doing books that are true crime and usually are leveraging some murder case. Well, you can't do that in a kid's book. So how are we going to analogize this to something that a young person would feel like, oh, I'm investigating like a detective, but it's probably not going to be a murder. So we got to figure out how to turn that corner. That's the next
Well, I
thing
mean, it
for the
reminds
fall.
me. I mean, I grew up reading the Hardy Boys, and so it's kind of like you
Hmm.
could kind of go that angle a little bit, you know. But
Yes. As
and
a
I
matter
know
of
I
fact, you know what,
go
Jason,
ahead.
we're going to use the Hardy Boys as a
Are you?
model for the next book because I don't know if you remember, like I love the Hardy Boys
Yeah, I
also,
read them all.
but do you remember? Yeah, do you remember the one they had that was a standalone, and it was kind of like a detective's primer. It was
Yes.
like the detective handbook for the Hardy
Hmm.
Boys, and it did have stories in it, but it was really like it had illustrations of how to lift fingerprints and all this
That's
great
right.
stuff. I thought that was awesome. So
Yeah.
that's the next book we're doing is kind of a detective's handbook.
Perfect.
So we got to figure out like where's this headed. But anyway, but that's still in the future.
Well, I want to be on that project, man, because I love that. It takes me back to my childhood. And also, a lot
Me
of people
too.
know on the show, which has been a blessing. Out of my four kids, two of the younger ones, Jackson now who's 15 and Haley's now 13, but years ago, they went through Cold Case Kids. That was
Oh,
part of their
excellent.
curriculum, yeah, for homeschool. And, you know, what a blessing that was. And so I just encourage people watching or listening to make sure that they get a copy of those as well. But man, I'm excited today because I got to say, when I was going through this not too long ago, prepping for the show, and I always hate this when our friends do this, like, "Man, that's your best book yet." But this was it because in a way it was so different, you know, because we live in the apologetic space all the time,
Yeah.
and you kind of like, I know that, I know that, I know that. Like that's a good piece of evidence. That's a good piece of evidence. But you do such a good job when you go way back to the cold case where you, like you said, graphically were trying to illustrate things. And I think I told
Right.
you, and I want to preface my first question with for people to understand that Dr. Norman Geyser, who was my spiritual mentor, like my spiritual father, I moved out here. I moved my family from Arizona to Charlotte, North Carolina to learn from him, had 12, 13, I think, fruitful years with him. And I remember one time we were hanging out and your book had just come out. And he said, when he heard your presentation, he said that was the most succinct, professional, clear, apologetic presentation on the Gospels that he's ever heard. And I
Wow.
mean, again, when Dr. Geyser says that, I was thinking, whoa, who's this guy, Jim? You know what I mean? And I think that's when eventually I got to know you.
Mhm.
And I'm like, yes, absolutely.
Well,
So, I mean,
I
how
don't,
you
I don't, I
illustrate.
absolutely do not deserve that praise from Norman.
Yeah,
I'll
he
tell you,
said
he
that.
became.
Yeah, I don't remember where I don't know if it was an SES conference or something, but he said that. And I never forgot it because you do have a way. But I got to say, this book and the truth and true crime, I love the stories and how you are and that's why I'm excited to dive in how you're able to get into the heart of why we exist and who we really are. And even when you see through violence or when you see through selfishness or
Right.
pride or different types of evils, if you will, that it actually is a reflection or sign that there is a God, you know, in this
Mhm.
whole moral pursuit of meaning. So, first question, obviously, and I know a lot of people watching or listening are familiar, Jim, with your background. But given the fact that you wrote this new book called The Truth and True Crime, let people know what type of experience that you have as a former cold case detective that has actually influenced you to write something like this.
Well, that was so I, have a background in the arts, and that was really how I came up thinking I was going to be an architect or a graphic artist or an industrial designer, something in the arts, and I wasn't quite sure where that was going to land. And my dad was a cop, and I grew up in that kind of realm. Had a lot of respect for what he did. To be honest, I kind of thought, well, this is a good, stable job for a family.
Mm,
And that was one of the reasons why I left the arts to become a police officer. I never really felt like I fit in at first, but they quickly moved me through into an investigative position, and I was starting to work investigations. Now, when I first was challenged on, not really challenged, but I walked into a church and the pastor said something provocative about Jesus. Well, I didn't know how to everyone comes to this examination of the claims of Christianity from whatever worldview they came from. And I was
yeah.
coming out of an investigative background. I thought, well, could you apply the template that we apply for eyewitness claims in California? I'm in California, and there are jury instructions for jurors to test eyewitnesses. If I applied those instructions to the Gospels, would they pass? That's what cold case became. Now, that's how I got in. That's what allowed me to lay down the barriers that I had built because I didn't know any Christians growing up, and my dad's a very committed atheist. So I needed to lay down some of those barriers to answer some of
Mm,
my own objections before I could actually hear the gospel clearly. And that's just was my way in. Now, so that was that's just how I got interested. That's how I examined the gospels. Years later, when I became a youth pastor and I was still in the seminary, I realized that my students were largely walking away in those days. They were largely walking away because they didn't think it was true. And I realized, hey, I better show them what I looked at, because I was so involved in the arts that my first year as a youth pastor, I was more concerned about what this experience was on
Mm.
Sundays. What did it sound like? How was it visually? What kind of visual experience? And I can tell you that that first year was a fun year, very creative, visual, creative year, yet it was very ineffective with my students. Most
Mm.
of them walked away from their faith while they were in college. Then the very next year, the very next semester. So I realized, hey, I got to go back to like, I'll make a case for this. Now, that's where I was when I met Sean McDowell, and he
Mm.
was the one who encouraged me to write a book.
Right.
And that's why the first book was Cold Case Christianity. But to be honest, even then, I mean, I thought it was effective for students. They needed to know why it was true. But I was already a Christian for some number of years by that time. And once I'd done this investigation, I was done with it. I mean, I knew it was true for evidential reasons, but I wasn't a Christian apologist. I was just a guy raising high schoolers. I was their youth pastor, and then I became a pastor of college age students. And this is just who I was. So this is the book, this kind of book, The Truth and True Crime, is really what I wanted to write all along. But
Mm.
my way into publishing was through Christian apologetics. And then you start to become a Christian apologist. Everyone thinks of you that way. I'm not a Christian apologist.
Yeah.
I'm just a Christian who as a case maker who came in this way. And so, yes, I still think about these things, I guess, like a case maker, and I still write like a case maker. But what I'm really interested in is connecting those kinds of unseen, the stuff that's hiding in plain sight. That's what cold case detectives do. This thing has been sitting cold for years because
Mm.
there's something that somebody missed. It's still there. It's right there. It's in the evidence set, probably. It just got overlooked in some way, or they just weren't able to connect that, or be insightful enough to say, "Oh, when he did that, do you see what that reveals?" And if I can articulate that clearly to a jury, we might make some progress on this case. So that's been kind of the approach that I've taken with my books. I think sometimes, Jason, I do a lot of work with police officers who have been tragically injured in a critical incident, and now they're struggling to figure out, like, who am I and what do I do next, and how am I going to survive this? I can barely walk, blah blah blah.
Mm.
It's good. I mean, important, critical stuff. I get it. And I feel like sometimes that police officers, every time they go to work, they step into an alternate universe. And they're in this universe in which the moral code is completely inverted. What's right is wrong. What's wrong is right. The relationship is just it's an entirely different universe, and you go call to call to call to call in that universe, and then you come home and you're back in the regular universe. It's almost like you're taking the red pill, right? You're able to see that there's two sides of reality, and you're trying to protect the regular universe your kids are living in and your spouse is living in from this other universe that you put your foot in every shift.
Mm.
And in that universe, you see a lot of stuff that you're like, wow, it really reveals the nature of who we are. And that's the stuff I've always been most interested in, is the stuff that, wow. Now, it turns out that those behaviors you see over there are described in an ancient book. And it's really clear. I just didn't know what the ancient book said
Right.
for a lot of years. As I remember growing up, and my dad was a cop, and so he was always very. And my parents divorced, and so I had like kind of like an uncle relationship with my dad, and he was always very cynical
Mm.
and not angry, but just didn't have a lot of hope. It seemed like my mom was just the opposite. Politically on the spectrum, they were polar opposites.
Mm.
And I used to think, man, my dad, I can't figure out why he's this way. Was he this way since he was born? As a kid? And my mom would say, no. When we first met, he was not like. Well, then I took on his job and I realized, oh, I
Wow.
get it. He's stepping his foot in the other universe all the time. And it's starting to change the way he's behaving in this universe.
Mm.
And so I think that there's stuff you see. And when I talk to police officers, there's a certain bond. And the bond is just like those people in the Matrix. Like, we've been on the other side. We know there's another side, and all of you don't get it. And we could talk about it forever. You're never going to understand it because you can't put your foot in it. But once you have a kinship. But
Mm-hmm.
it does reveal things. And that's why I think people are so fascinated with true crime. It's kind of like travel.
Yeah.
Those travel shows everyone likes to see. What's it like in Argentina? What would you like to live there? I think true crime is kind of like a travel show. What's it like to live in the other universe? What's that universe look like? And I think when you watch these shows, you're putting it's a travel show, basically. You're getting a chance to see what the other, what this other world is like.
Well, it's like you said. I mean, the biggest podcasts right now are true crime stories. People digging
Yeah.
into storylines. I mean, they just did a. I forgot who's streaming it nowadays. You forget, like, if it's Peacock, Netflix, whatever. I mean, I don't even remember.
I
Sometimes when
know.
people say, "Have you seen that one show?" I'm like, and you ask them, "What's it on?" They're like, I don't remember. That's how bad it is. And then you're like,
Yes, it
forget it. I'm
is.
not going to look for it. But the one was about a podcaster doing a true crime podcasting with a producer, and they make a whole show centered around that whole thing, and they're going into like Europe somewhere to figure out a cold case. And
Yes.
I was thinking, why isn't
Those are
Jimenez?
very popular.
Yeah, they're
Yeah.
very popular, and so they're making a show
Yeah.
about a show about a show kind of thing, right?
Yeah, yeah, right.
But it's
Well, look at the
because
show.
it's
Look at the
yeah,
comedy show with Steve Allen
yeah,
about Steve Martin, rather,
Steve Martin,
Steve Martin about
with Martin Short,
podcasting.
yeah.
Yeah, and Martin Short.
See,
That's
that's
just
the same
Steve
thing too.
Martin.
Yeah,
Martin Short.
yeah,
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 same exact thing, right? So
same
yeah,
exact stuff.
absolutely.
So it's really big, but what I thought was also fascinating, and in knowing a lot about your story, like you said, and how you kind of evolved and how God has really shaped you and Susie and all that stuff, and it is a tremendous story being a granddad now, and having a different perspective, with that now,
Mhm.
seeing a third
Yeah.
generation in your family come about. But when you're putting this book together, and like you said, it was unique. But I really did feel the same way. Stylistically, it was like you were in your lane. It really seemed like
Mm,
you
mm.
how you were telling the story, piecing things together, and then of course revealing your faith with the biblical worldview. But I got to ask you, how did you? Because I mean, you were doing this for decades, and
Mhm.
how do you go back, if you will, and start pulling what you thought would be relevant stories into this one to where you pull basically 15 leads or profound truths that speak
Mhm.
to the meaning of life.
Well, so what happened was, this was so when Sean said, "Hey, you should write a book," I wasn't sure what kind of book that would be. But we were teaching a chain of custody to his students going to Berkeley. So I figured it would probably be this cold case Christianity book that came out. But I also, at the same time, because when you talk to a publisher, they want to know, like, do you have more than one idea for a book? Because we might not like your idea.
Yeah.
So I pitched at the same time what ended up becoming God's Crime Scene and Forensic Faith and Cold Case all at the same time. Now, at that time, I was really interested in this book. And I called it, at the time, I called it Death Lessons. Nobody liked the idea. Nobody liked the name of the title of the book. As a matter of fact, we
Yeah.
didn't use any title I could think of. We ended up using Chat GBT, or yeah,
Yeah.
Chat,
Putting it in
AI, to
AI.
pick the title, because every title I had, everyone thought it was terrible. So I mean, we started to kind of just see, give me 100 titles in this genre, and we took those 100 titles and we looked through them all, and this is the one we ended up with. Okay, so I really wanted to write this book for so long that I
Mhm.
kept a Word document. I don't know how you do when you write books,
Yeah.
but I have a folder in my hard drive that's backed up, and in this folder, I have every idea I've ever had for a book. It's in a separate folder inside that folder, and in there I have Word documents of just mind dumps, things that when I
Yep.
get something, I'll put it on my phone, I'll go home, I'll put it in that folder. Well, I had been collecting ideas for this book from cases that I had worked that were like just like eye opening. Like, oh, that highlighted something. So I probably had maybe 40 cases that I thought told me something. I wasn't sure how many I was going to write about. Um, the only reason why I wrote about 15 is because I originally had, after that title, Death Lessons, I had a title called 15 to Life. I thought that would be a good title for the book, right? That's a death sentence. That's a murder sentence here in California, 15 to life. But there is no 10 to life. So I knew I had to write 15 chapters.
Oh, gotcha.
But I could have done probably 40 different things out of that,
Mhm.
because there's so much about human nature that is revealed in true crime, only because I think all of us, whether we like to think of ourselves this way or not, we're all criminals. And we all actively do something like this. Now, you can argue that when you're talking to somebody who goes to jail for something bad, they've just taken this behavior that we're predisposed toward and they put it on steroids and they've gotten caught doing it. But the reality of it is that the heart of the criminal is in all of us. And that's why I think we are interested in true crime. It's like,
Mhm.
wow, what would happen if I let my kind of hidden, unspoken desires run amok? That's what you see in true crime, because it's not like this is like these are completely foreign notions to the viewers. The viewers all experience these same desires, these same impulses. We just don't act on them for one reason or another. But I think that's one of the reasons why people are interested in it. So I was keeping a Word document, and I would pitch this book occasionally.
Mm,
And every time I
okay.
would pitch it, the publishers would say, it's not really an apologetics book. Well, it kind of is, because if Christianity is true, it ought to describe its primary documents ought to describe the world the way it really is, and it ought to describe us the way we really are. So I do think this is an evidence that this is true, because it's kind of more of a presuppositional approach, I guess. But the point is, it makes the best explanation of reality,
Hmm.
especially based on biblical anthropology. So that's kind of this book it is. But I remember when I went to Zondervan, who I'm publishing through, I pitched this book first, and they said, "Well, we really want a cold case Christianity book over here," because I did that book with David C. Cook. And I said, "Well, I've already written Cold
Yeah, I've
Case
already, yeah.
Christianity. I'm not sure what I can tell you." They said, "Well, when you first examined Christianity, was that everything you examined?" I said, "No," because I'd written online on my blog tons of articles on, for example, the non-canonicals,
Mhm.
other things that I was looking at back when I was first looking at Christianity that just didn't make it into Cold Case. Well, that became a book called Person of Interest, because that's what they wanted first. And then that earned the right for me
Mhm.
to write the book I've always wanted to write, which is this book. Now, you're right in the sense that this is probably more pastoral than
Yeah,
anything I've written before.
yeah.
But I was a pastor for years,
Yep.
bivocationally, and so a lot of this is the stuff that I would have. And I would say this too, Jason. I don't think many of us who, we there's a part of me that is concerned that Christian apologetics has become more divisive than it has been gospel centered.
Yeah.
And I've never believed that there was power in my defense of the
Mhm.
gospel. There's only power in the gospel. Yeah, I get it. I want to get to the gospel. And if you've got some reason why you won't listen to me, we're going to address those issues first. But in the end, my case doesn't really have power. The power of God is in the gospel. And so I need to get to it. And there's a sense in which most conversations I think I'm going to have with people are probably not starting with apologetics. They're probably starting with, this is the messiness of my life. And I'm trying to figure out, if God, why this? And there's an aspect of apologetics in that, of course. But I think this is the book that probably where most conversations you're going to have with anyone in your life are probably going to be the topics in this book and not the topics in my other books. Now, granted, you may have to go to those topics in order to clear some brush
Right.
so you can get to the gospel. But the reality of it is, what's I guess part of it too is that we've been working so much with these officers who have experienced trauma
Mm.
that I'm wondering if this is the one universal of everyone I've ever met and anyone I ever will meet, and that's that all of us are going to suffer to one extent or another. We're going to have challenges, some more than others. That is the universal. So in the end,
That's right.
if our worldview does not have adequate resources for suffering, it's not much of a worldview. And that's what I think the most of these chapters are about: is how do we respond to these things that all of us are going to experience?
Well, I think it speaks to me. I mean, before I really got into like apologetics, and I don't like you. I don't like. I like how you've always referred to yourself as a case maker. And my thing is like, people have their terminologies and titles for whatever, Christian
Hmm.
apologist or something.
Hmm.
But
Yeah.
me, as my giftedness, my calling is to be a pastor, to be a shepherd.
Right.
And so my thing is like, how do you take God's truth and his beauty and goodness and you wrestle with that in life with people? I mean, I
Yeah.
was telling you guys actually, it was really compelling to me too, is I used the Friday night Paris Olympics thing and I put it on an atheist friend of mine who's from Brazil and spent most of his adult life in Germany and then moves to the States because he married an American in Germany and she wanted to move back to be with family and they have a child together. He's an atheist. Nice guy. Okay. And I use that as an example to see what his moral compass, if you will, is. And he was upset to hear that France did what they did. But he's like, we all have to be inclusive. And then I said, well, what does that mean? To what degree? And he didn't really know because he has no standard. Not to say he's an
Right.
amoral or immoral person, but even like that, Jim, it's like where he is at is not a place to say, have you read the Bible? Do you believe it's true? What do you think
Yeah.
about Jesus dying on the cross for sins? I
Yeah.
mean, we
Right.
can
Right.
get there down the road, But I'm just talking about life with him, and he's struggled. He struggled in Brazil. He didn't make a lot of money. They had issues in Germany. He kind of like believes in yourself type of stuff and what the universe is telling you, that kind of a stuff.
Right,
And
right, right,
but that's why when I was reading your book, it's so true. Where like a lot of times when people commit these crimes, it's not just to cover up a wrong they did. They got mixed up in things they had no control over eventually. And maybe they jumped
right.
in for the wrong reasons: selfishness, greed, pride, jealousy, outbursts of wrath that we see, explicitly in Colossians 3. So I love that. And so one thing I was thinking about when I was preparing this show with you was just as a personal friend too, and an author. And I know we'll highlight the 15 truths. But what was the one compelling lesson that you took away as you wrote this book?
Well, I think that there are a couple of big things that are governing even what I'm doing now, even the way I'm reading scripture now. I always think it's interesting if you discover this one truth and then you read all of scripture through that truth, it starts to unlock and open your eyes to other things in scripture that you wouldn't have maybe seen if you hadn't been holding on to that, looking through that lens. So some of the things that I see, that the importance of identity is
Mm.
to be absolutely, there's no way I can express it enough, the importance of identity to every one of us, whether we are a Christian or not. Identity is so key. One psychologist, who I quote in the book, describes it, I think, accurately as humanity's core need. Core need. That means there's nothing more core than the core. The core is at the very center of everything else. And I think that is true, that who we are determines, and who we
That's right.
think we are, how we see ourselves and how we want others to see us, is behind every place that we flourish or don't flourish. It's what's happening right now on in the Paris Olympics. It's that people have decided, they've chosen a way to identify themselves. All virtue signaling, for example, is an effort to be part of a group, to identify with a group and to show your allegiance to that group. We will signal to that group that we're part of you. So it turns out that what I discovered, so I think the chapters in this book, and there are 15 chapters, there's a chapter on identity. I think that's huge. There's a chapter on humility. I think that's huge. There's a
Mm-hmm.
chapter on misplaced devotion. I think
Mm,
that's huge. And there's a chapter on
that's
trauma
right.
and how we can grow on the backside of trauma. Because what I've discovered is that every time you suffer a trauma, you shift your identity because something changes. You realize, oh, I'm not who I thought I was. Our family is not who I thought our family was. And this is so common, and it took me a while to see it with officers, that what they were struggling with
Mm,
was not the pain, because they've already recovered. They were in the hospital, they got through it. Some of them have recovered completely. But what they're struggling with is how they're seeing themselves. They saw
that's right.
themselves as this tactically sound, invincible alpha dog. And then they were brought to a point of absolute submission by a suspect who dang near killed them.
Mm,
And now they're struggling with their own personal sense of who they are. And are they capable? Because it turns out identity is so linked to purpose and value that they cannot be separated. They're almost synonyms.
that's right.
So, so that's a huge thing. And when you suffer a trauma, it changes the way you think of yourself. Now, what's interesting is the inverse is also true. That not only does trauma change the way you think about yourself, but shifts in your identity will cause you trauma. And we often place our identity in things that are shiftable. So if all I said to young people was, tell you what, I got some advice for you on how to have a life that's filled with fewer challenges, and the depth of those challenges will be much more shallow. Place your identity in something that doesn't shift. Pretty simple. Because it's that shifting identity that shakes us, because it's a core attribute of who we are. The more continuous it is and unchangeable it is, the better we survive, the better we respond to challenges, to trauma.
Mm-hmm.
That realization, the core importance of identity. So if you just said, okay, so to become a Christian means a lot of things, to accept Jesus Christ as your savior. But once you do that, Paul says you will be in Christ. Your identity will change. There is no following Jesus that is not accompanied by an identity change. There is none.
Mm,
So if you said to yourself, go back now and read every time when someone becomes a Christian, only read it this time through the lens of how their identity changes. It'll open up those scriptures to you in a new way. So I think that for me, that was like the biggest takeaway and doing, I've wanted to write about that for a long time, but for me, it became real when I started to work with people who had suffered trauma and we're trying to figure out, like, how do I, and we talk about this in the book, there's a way to actually flourish on the backside of trauma, not just get back to where you were. That's called resiliency, but to flourish at a higher level on the backside of trauma than you had on the front side of trauma. That's called post-traumatic growth. How do you get there? A lot of it does have to do with your identity and how you see the world. So this is the stuff that I think was the most important stuff that we're writing about right now. And it's what I'm most interested in.
Yeah.
That's where our work is right now.
It's powerful. I mean, it's powerful. I mean, I wish we could go through all 15, but I encourage people with the book, The Truth in True Crime, What Investigating Death Teaches Us About the Meaning of Life. So let's dive in a few chapters in some of these lessons that you can kind of highlight for us. The first one, obviously, is you call it here in the book, Lead One, and the chapter is A Pool of Blood Under My Feet, How to Make Age Appropriate Mistakes, and then you say you were created to learn. So speak on that, right? That truth, that lead.
Well, like even your friend you were saying from Brazil and then from Germany and now the United States. I mean, people love wisdom and they want to learn things. They want to do better. They want to succeed. Why? Is it just completely selfish? Is it just because those people who do learn, they survive better in the paradigm, so therefore they have an evolutionary advantage over those who don't? Or is it possible that the reason why we seek knowledge, and we know because we know it's out there, we know there is a source of knowledge that is so complete, so perfect, that if we could just tap into that source, things which it's like they have this, there's like hidden, how many different sects of spiritual groups over the centuries have been interested in esoteric knowledge, the mysteries. Why do we know there are mysteries out there that are even bigger than the human mind? Like, so what is wisdom? Why do we seek it? It's not just knowledge, because if it was knowledge, we just use the word knowledge. There's something about wisdom that's different than just knowledge. Does it include knowledge? Of course it does. But it turns out that the secular research on this is eye-opening, because it reveals something that's very ancient. And I quote a couple of surveys and a couple of studies that were done. One major study that was done in an Ivy League university setting that looked at what is wisdom and how is it gained. And one of the things they observed, I thought was super powerful, was they observed the idea that wisdom has a moral pillar. It has to have a moral pillar. Otherwise, a question like, what's the wisest way to do a rape? Who would say such a thing? Who would even think to ask that question? It's not wise to, what's the wisest way to do a kidnapping? What's the wisest way to do a armed robbery? Well, no. Okay. You mean what's the way that you can be the most successful? Because it's not wise to do these things because they are by their very nature immoral and unwise. And even the secularists will say that, yeah, there has to be a moral pillar or otherwise you're saying there is a wise way to do something immoral. No, by definition, it's out of the category of wise. Oh, that means you need a moral pillar. Now, the only question, of course, is what establishes that moral pillar. Now, interestingly, if you're working if you're an atheist who's a police officer, you work in groups that have their own moral codes. Especially if you're working gangs in South Central Los Angeles, you're working with groups that have a certain moral code, and what violates that code and why they would retaliate against a neighboring gang, you would think to yourself, wow, there's a code amongst thieves. And if you look at it, you're like, it's interesting that there is this code because it's not a code that we would embrace. It's a different kind of code. Well, that's true. And that's because that's a code that's grounded in a group think. It's grounded in a group of people who have decided what are the rules of engagement. Look, if you do that to our gang, you should expect this kind of response. I'm not going to be upset if I do that to you. I'm going to expect the same response. That's the code. Well, okay. We think if there's a moral code that grounds wisdom, it probably needs to be more than a moral code established by groups, because we would say that's not a code we want to live by as a group. So it turns out that this kind of thinking from secularists exposes the need for an objective moral standard to ground that moral pillar in wisdom. There's a couple of chapters here. I think also friend selection is a chapter later on that talks about how to pick friends. And the secular research, whenever it says that there is a component that is moral or virtuous, that's the slippery slope language that really is best satisfied by a theistic worldview that can ground morality and ground virtue in something that's transcendent and unchanging. So I think that this being one leg that the secularist community says, yeah, this is what's going to be necessary for wisdom, does kind of give a theistic worldview an advantage, because we at least could say, Yes, we agree. And that moral code needs to be objectively grounded in something bigger than the group. Otherwise, groups are going to battle with groups and no one's going to be right or wrong. And it's wise, whatever you do, you could say it's wise, even though it would violate a code that somebody holds to. So I think in the end, that's one of the reasons why, when you start to watch how groups behave, it starts to open your eyes to the different ways we use these words. But
Yeah.
yes, I think we do seek wisdom because we were created to learn. This is what wisdom books are. When we were doing the video series for this, Jason, I was a little bit concerned because there's a chapter in here on marriage. There's a chapter here on fatherhood,
Mhm.
and the group I was filming the 16-part video series are much younger than an old guy like me. And I often wondered, are we at a place right now where young people are like, if I say that if you do this, you're probably going to get victimized, or this victim could have avoided being a victim if they just didn't do this. That is now sounds like victim blaming. If I say there's an advantage to being married, and there are, because we see this in the research, well, that sounds like I'm single shaming. So because this blaming, shaming kind of notion is out there in the culture, I think we're at a point where we have to be like, hey, we have to almost have to sell the idea that there is wisdom. But if this isn't true, then all of Proverbs is a waste of time, right? Because Proverbs is just telling you constantly, the writers of Proverbs, Solomon or whoever it may be, are arguing, hey, if you do stupid things and hang out with stupid people, you're going to get stupid results.
Mhm.
Are you shaming me for hanging out with stupid people? Well, yeah, basically. I'm telling you shouldn't do it, because if you do it, you open the door to stupid. Well, I
Mm.
think that's fair. So I just hope we're still at a place with an entire generation in which we could offer wisdom.
And it's so important too. As I'm listening to you, Jim, like I'm preaching this Sunday in Colossians 1, 9 through 14. And as I'm listening to you, it's so true because Paul, he gives these, I call it the layers of prayer, that you may know his will, but it's not just information. It's not like you just said knowledge, but he says with spiritual wisdom in understanding, that you can have that skillful application that you said comes from God, because we know Christ
Right.
is wisdom. And so that's so profound. You had touched on earlier. I want to hit this other one here and lead number 6, where the title's
Mhm.
Legends, Liars, and Liabilities: How to
Yeah.
Moderate Your Celebrity. And I love this chapter. You were created to pursue humility. So it's in the context of you being a cold case detective, like in your profession, and using the cold cases that you investigated and try to solve. A lot of them you did. Um, but what lessons of humility did you learn from being a cold case detective?
Wow. I don't think when I was a cold case detective, I was very humble. I think this is something that takes, I mean, I'm 63 now. I think I've learned lessons of humility more because when you're advancing through an agency like that and you're getting opportunities to work cold cases, it's because you did something else well before.
Right.
And these assignments are like rewards. Like not everyone who puts in for detectives gets to be a detective. And then I also went right away to what we call our A team. Well, that's the robbery homicide desk. That was my first assignment in detectives. Usually people spend years working to that position. That just fills your head with a bunch of junk that
Mm-hmm.
you don't need. I think I've learned more about humility from watching how it train wrecks and then
Right.
having to go back and say, wow, I am way worse than that guy. Yet for the grace of God, I haven't train wrecked yet, but
Amen.
I'm on my way. So
Yeah.
maybe it's time to pull back a little bit. I also think as you get older, you just get over yourself, right? I mean, I didn't start writing books until I was 52. So there's a good chance I'm not going to see it as a career or see it as the opportunity to, already too old. I mean, if I was 22, maybe I would have built on that and said, wow, there's some great future. But when you're this age and your grandkids are coming and you want to be able to carve the time to be the best grandfather you can be, well, that means you can't do any of this stuff anymore. You're going to have to lay it down because I need to be available for in a way that I wasn't available before. So I had a season. It's the season between your kids leaving your house and your kids having their kids. That 10 years, I was able to do some great things and write books and travel and speak all over the country. But now my priorities have to shift back to where they were before, and you're just not going to be able to do that. And I think as you get older, humility is Well, the other thing too is, to be honest about vanity, you look in the mirror and you realize, dude, I'm an old guy. Like
Yeah.
whatever I thought I was, that dude's aging.
Yeah.
And at some point, you just have to get realistic about it and realize that it's young guys like you who are the next generation of this effort. And we have to pour into young people
Mhm.
and get the heck off the stage.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of that is probably just part of the natural aging process. But what I've seen in criminal trials, in criminal behavior, is that we're so autonomous and we think we're somebody. And that often leads to scary consequences. Here's why. There's only three reasons why anyone does anything they shouldn't do. We talked about it 1,000 times. Sex, money, and power. That's it. Sex, money, and power. There's no fourth cause. All of the stupid behavior, criminal behavior, sinful behavior, whatever thing you've ever done that's ever been wrong has been caused by one of those three motivations. Now, here's what's interesting. Celebrity is in the third category for power, authority, respect.
Mm.
It's to be somebody. Now, here's what I've discovered. We're in a world right now where you think, well, celebrities, that's not my issue. Oh, do you have social media? It's your issue. Because if we have social media, everyone wants to have more likes, more
Yep.
views, more attention, more
More
followers, more
subscribers. Yep.
subscribers. Yeah,
Hmm.
all that nonsense. Okay. So we're all now with no gatekeepers. Because remember, when I was a young man, if you wanted to be nationally famous, you had to go through ABC, NBC, or CBS, those legacy
That's right.
gatekeepers. And you probably needed to be in the 8 o'clock time slot because by 9, 10 o'clock, nobody was watching the show. You needed to be, and how many shows that means? That means there's 3 shows, maybe 6 shows a night that will make you famous. That's
Hmm.
it. Well, now those gatekeepers are gone. If you got a YouTube channel, you can have way more viewers than any of the legacy TV shows. Isn't that amazing?
Yeah.
There are people right now on
Yeah.
YouTube who have more views weekly than anyone on legacy TV. Oh my goodness, no gatekeepers. Celebrity is now potential is there for all of us. All of us. It's just a matter of do you want it? And even those of us who aren't chasing like a platform, we do have a platform, whether we like it or not, or think about it or not.
Mm.
Now, why does this matter? Because it turns out, this is the takeaway for me, is that anytime anyone scratches one of those three itches, sex, money, or power, they will eventually scratch the other two.
Yeah.
Period.
That's right.
We
Period.
saw it with Ravi Zacharias.
Yep.
We see it. Now, here's what I would say. Even like when we protect pastors, right? We'll say, okay, pastors, at our church, we want to protect you in the areas that we know pastors fall. They only fall in sex, money, and power. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to make sure that you've got some, maybe the Billy Graham rule, some way to make sure that you're
Hmm.
not going to be attracted to people who have sex. So I get that. Okay. Or we'll say, we're going to make sure that you're not going to be like overpay you. We want to protect you from, money and sex. And those boundaries are almost always in place, especially in bigger churches, to guard pastors from these kinds of temptations. But when it comes to celebrity,
Yeah.
no, the elder board wants you to be famous. They want
Mhm.
more. They want, yeah, we'll just grow that podcasts and social media platforms and Instagram posts and all. We'll even hire people to help make you famous because we want more people to hear about the gospel through this church. Well, you really want to do that? Because I'm telling you, you're just growing celebrity. And it's from that's the first itch. Trust me, if Ravi Zacharias did not have money and celebrity, he probably wouldn't have gotten in trouble the other way. It was money and celebrity that kept the whole thing quiet as long as it did. So in the end, we have to be really realistic about the danger of celebrity. And the only solution to celebrity is humility. Now,
And
here's what's interesting.
it is,
Yeah.
yeah, and humility, as you later talk about redemption too. Humility points, like you said, like wisdom to a higher immutable power
Well,
because
think about it.
it's not in us.
Humility is the one thing that is the best chief. We talked about this yesterday in the meeting with
Yeah,
Stand to Reason. It's the one attribute that if you adopt it will improve all of your metrics
everything.
dramatically. So I've got a list of all those in the book. I've collected all the research for years on that. It's fascinating. And every time I see it, you just look forward to it. There's always something new about this mystery attribute called humility. Now, what's interesting about that is
Amen.
that no worldview advances humility except for one. Every worldview that advances doing to achieve something, a meritocracy of any kind, is going to build pride. Because doing worldviews is like, hey, I'm proud of what I've done. I deserve this. I did all these things for 4 years. Give me the degree. I did all this for all your job. I give me the promotion. And I did more than that guy did. It's divisive. By its very nature, doing is divisive. I
And
did
we're
more
not
than that guy.
Yeah, and we're not trying to throw Mormonism or anything down the, but the reality is they're going to be a god. They're the progressive
That's
divinity.
right. Well, okay,
And you
so this
talk about
means in every secular view, right, is going to say basically it's a meritocracy. So those don't promote humility. And you're right, every theistic view, like Mormonism, but every other spiritual view is about doing something to please the deity or to achieve the highest thing the deity
Yep, higher
offers, like celestial
consciousness, inner
kingdom. Right,
peace. Yeah. I've
right.
achieved at J Dubs that, I'm good to get into a higher level of heaven. So I'm out there recruiting and proselytizing. I mean, it's so true and it's so powerful and it's so good. I definitely encourage people to get this book. I mean, because you talk about we were created for restoration, we were created for redemption. You talked about justice and peace. You were created for your heavenly Father, which I love that one. You were created for eternity. You were created to be saved. I mean, so these are so many powerful truths that you have learned. And so, what I wanted to ask you as we get out of here, Jim, and I appreciate just the time, the book, and the wealth of wisdom and knowledge in it. And I do pray that it impacts the church world, Christians in general. So, if I'm a Christian and I get the truth in true crime,
Yeah.
how can I use this? I mean, obviously we get it as we're going through the truths that we learn as a Christian, we believe, and to grow in our wisdom and to grow in our faith. But how can I use this to engage the skeptic in my life?
Yeah, I think this is a book, hopefully, that'll help you see that everyone's point of struggle is slightly different. And if I'm honest, everyone's point of struggle is something that is theological. It's not, we have a
Mm,
tendency to see it as, oh, I'm in this temporal world and I did this, so therefore I'm suffering this consequence. Or I did nothing and I'm suffering this consequence. Well, all of these are because we're looking at it through the wrong theological lens. And so I think that for me, it's going to come down to conversations typically start at a point of struggle because that's where we're so selfish that what we really want is the pain to
that's right.
stop.
That's
We
right.
really want to do better in a certain area, like your friend who wants to do say better financially. Well, we got a chapter in here about finances, right? And what I learned, if I just give you an example of this, let's say that is the place where you have got a connection point with a friend who is really struggling to be content, has enough to survive, but feels like I could do better, and is never quite satisfied with where they are in life. Well, that's a theological issue. There's two ways to become financially independent. And the financial independence is not the ability to buy anything. It's the ability to buy anything you want. I don't want anything. So I was financially independent the minute I retired, not because of my income level. I'm a cop. Because of my want level, it was really low. And I married somebody whose want level is even lower.
Yeah.
So because we don't want anything, now we're able to do. Now we can go serve for 6 weeks in the summer and just do it as a volunteer. I have no financial commitment to any of it because I've already got everything I want. Well, it turns out if you think about that, that's a very very well discussed claim of the New Testament, right? Jesus talks a lot about this. And so it turns out that when I meet somebody who is struggling in this area, I know I'm pretty close to the gospel because this issue they're struggling with is theological.
Yeah.
And the New Testament says a lot about it. And it tells you how to flourish, how you could overcome this perception you have of discontent. And so all I have to do is to ask, are you ready to let go of that? Would you like to live differently? Would you like to live in a way where you didn't feel that tug of war constantly about what you want? Because there's a way to do it. But the answer is not through self-help books and it's not through increased effort. Turns out all of this is a matter of surrender. Isn't that interesting? The
Yeah.
upside down logic of
Yeah.
Jesus. The way up is down, the way down is up. The first will be last, the last will be first. Freedom is in surrender. Oh, how could that be? Most of us think that freedom is in absolute control, but it turns out freedom is in absolute surrender.
Hmm.
And I think that it's easier for me, to be honest. I sometimes feel when I'm talking to somebody who's in their 20s, I almost feel like saying, hold on to that. Let's come back to that when you're in your 60s. Because it's not until you're at the end of yourself that you're going to probably be ready to hear this. Because I can say it, but I know you're probably going to want to try a lot of things that are on your own effort for a lot of years still until you realize those don't work.
Mm.
Very few young people are open. We all think that we could do it better than the old guy who's
Yeah.
giving you that piece of advice.
Yeah.
As we were talking yesterday about how even like your kids, they want to learn how to parent on TikTok. They don't want to listen to their parents. right? As if their parents are now an outdated source of information. Let me try it my way for a while. And so I think that sometimes I feel like when I'm talking to younger people that I wish I could just say, hey, hold on to that idea. Let's come back to it in
Mm,
25 years. But the reality of it is, I think that's why books like this, or just any, do you need this book? No, guys, come on. I think this book will open your eyes. But for me, all of the stuff I'm learning that's in this book, I'm learning in scripture every day, every day. And I think that what's changed for me is especially since I became a grandparent and kind of reclaimed some of my schedule, is that I can devote my schedule back to Bible reading, which for a
well,
lot of years, I wasn't able to do to the extent that I wanted because I was too darn busy, and I allowed myself to get that busy,
yeah,
where it was becoming this thing I was squeezing in, not this thing that now I walk and like this morning I walked by my couch where my Bible is sitting, and I'm like, oh, it's like I'm tempted just to stop everything and go over
and
there
just
for
go
an
into
hour.
it.
Yeah.
That's
So
right.
that's really where this wisdom hopefully is coming from. Is I'm just trying to take it and throw it through the lens of true crime, so that people will say, oh, and that's just it's parables. It's 15 parables, stories that
That's
make
right.
a point. That when you may not remember the point, but you'll remember the parable, and hopefully that'll help you have a better life.
And it's way better than Jordan Peterson's 12 Rules. I'll tell you that much. So,
I've
yeah,
not, I tell people all the time, I
you've
still
never
haven't
read
read
it.
his 12 rules. And the reason why I didn't read it is because I didn't want to have any overlap. I
Yeah,
don't think
yeah.
there's
You
any
don't want to be
overlap. There might
influenced.
be.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, but I didn't want to be
No,
influenced by it.
well, it is powerful. And brother, I appreciate again just the fact that you could see the wisdom oozing out of the book. It's insightful. It's got the stories. It will help even me, like you said, just as a friend, like someone who's lived at least 20 years old, about less than 20, but I mean, that's you got wisdom there. And when I was reading some of these things, I can see life lessons. And I'm certainly was going to be using this to, and that's why I wanted to ask you a question. How can a Christian take this to engage somebody who doesn't believe? And I could take any one of these leads, you call them, or truths, as a Christian into my day to day conversation. I have a friend right now, walked away from the faith years ago. I don't even know what that looks like. He's in his late 40s, like me. And he's very open, very down to earth kind of a guy. But like you said, one of the pains that he's dealing
Mm,
with, he went through a divorce. He's already falling in love with another woman, and he doesn't know what is the next thing in that relationship, or if he should even take the next step in the relationship. And he's very scared and he's very nervous, but he has no anchor. It's just him, just how
mm,
he feels. And even just listening to him, I'm thinking, man, this is going to be something good to even share with him about the meaning of life and pointing it back to God, and hopefully, yeah, see him come back to the Lord. So, hey, Jim. So real quickly as we go, what's the best way,
yeah.
obviously, for people to get this book? And obviously, you have a whole curriculum. There's video stuff that come available. So your website and obviously like Zondervan and other places.
Yeah, with our website's coldcasechristianity.com, but we set up a special website for this, just thetruthinTrueCrime.com, thetruthinTrueCrime.com. And that's where we give I think a 3-chapter sample and a
Yeah.
video, audio sample. There's a video sample, the video curriculum. I always say that try to exhaust whatever an author is willing to give you for free before you spend a dime. So we've got
That's
tons
right.
of articles right on our website. And so we hope that we can contribute. I'm always suspicious because I was a non-Christian for so many years. I was always suspicious that Christians were just trying to monetize everything. Here I am now
Mm,
writing books. So what we try to do is offer so much free stuff with the purchase of a book that it doesn't feel like it's much. So with this book, if you purchase it, we've got a 30 session, I think 10 and a half hour case
wow.
makers course that we offer with the book for free. We just want people to feel like, hey, we're not asking too much for whatever the 13, 15 bucks, whatever it is for a book. Because I just know that I want to take that off the table if I can, because that's not why we do any of this. We
Yeah.
do it because this is the season we're in. This season in life right now, as retirees, we're in a season where we're trying to contribute in some way while we still do all the other things, the
Yeah.
grandparenting things,
Yeah.
right, which are big for us right now. So
Well, it's an amazing book. I encourage everybody watching or listening, The Truth in True Crime: What Investigating Death Teaches Us About the Meaning of Life. And as you guys heard from Jim, he's written many books, many best-selling books, but this definitely is closest to his heart, and I encourage you guys to definitely get the copy of this book. So Jim, as always, thanks my friend for coming on. Appreciate you and your witness.
Yes, I look forward to seeing you in a month. We'll get a chance to hang out for dinner, hang out at the conference. It's going to be awesome.
Pray
Look
together.
forward to it.
Amen, brother. Well, I
Yep.
appreciate you,
All
man.
right.
Well, my friends, I want to thank you guys for taking the time to watch and to listen. And I just want to encourage you guys, what Jim was saying earlier, to take advantage, not just to buy his book, but to just go to his website. You can go to truthandtruecrime.org.com. You can also go to Cold Case Christianity, and there you can get many great and well deserved and well researched resources that can help you stand strong in your faith. So thank you guys for watching. Until next time, keep having those challenging conversations.